Okay, so my name is Terry Clark, and I'm the director of the Professional Services Division. And it may seem to some of you like this is a deja vu. Weren't we here just like 2 weeks ago talking about program updates due to the commission action? And the answer is yes, we were. But luckily, the governor has signed an executive order N66-20, which means we have some additional options. And the additional option has to do with the executive order and if a candidate has not completed the APA. And so it's a little more complex as to what type of document your completers this year are going to be eligible to be awarded by you as a preliminary program. We also want to talk with the induction programs about supporting these candidates as they move into induction. So I am Terry Clark, as I said. We're going to move it to the welcome slide, and I'm going to have Amy Rising go ahead and work us through the other introductions and our agenda.
Thank you, Terry Clark. Yes, good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining us again for this important information update. My name is Amy Rising. I'm the Director of Performance Assessment, Policy and Development for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and I'm joined by several colleagues, so each of them will introduce themselves. Cheryl, would you like to say good morning?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Cheryl Hickey. I am an administrator in Professional Services Division working on accreditation and policy. So welcome, everybody, this morning.
And Gay Roby.
Good morning. It's so nice to have you join us and hear the latest and greatest news out of the state agency.
And Brittany.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. I'm Brittany G, and I'm a manager in certification.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And we are also joined by two additional staff who are going to help us with the Q&A this morning. James Webb, would you like to say good morning?
Yes, thank you, Amy. Good morning. I'm James Webb. I'm a consultant with the Performance Assessment Development, and I work with Amy and Gay on issues related to performance assessment with the Cal TPA and Cal APA, and our new to be seen Ed Specialist Cal TPA.
Great, thank you, James. And also Kara Mendoza is with us from PSD. Kara?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kara Mendoza. I'm an administrator with overseeing grants, exams, and our accreditation dashboards. It's nice to be here.
So that brings us to our norms slide, please. So just quickly, we use this slide as we offer our work to you through Zoom. So just a quick reminder, we did mute your microphone, but Terry will be able to turn it back on if we call upon you for a question. We will use the question and answer feature this morning for you to post your questions. So please find the Q&A and put your questions there, and we will periodically address those questions, and certainly at the end of the presentation of slides, we will have time for answering, hopefully, all of your questions today. Please do pose questions that are related to the current topic of the slides in the agenda for today so that we can keep our conversation focused because we only have an hour together this morning. And also, if you don't mind, please try not to multitask. Please stay with us and look at the information on the slides so that we can really answer those questions that are in addition perhaps to what we are offering to you this morning. And then finally, let's be sure to honor time for all participants and presenters by all of us moderating our participation this morning. So thank you for sticking to these norms. And with that, I believe I'm going to walk you through the agenda real quick. We are going to look at completing candidates that are both preliminary, in preliminary programs currently and moving toward their induction program. We're going to think about eligibility questions and the executive order provisions. EO throughout these slides stands for executive order. Support for the new administrator to complete those preliminary requirements as part of the IEP and induction, and we will talk about that. And then, of course, talk about administrator induction and how we will help our candidates move from preliminary into induction. There will be recommendation guidance offered by Brittany, and then at the end, as promised, Q&A. With that, I'll turn it over to Cheryl.
So one of the first things we wanted to talk about is that as we go through these slides, we're going to identify whether the slide is applicable to the preliminary admin program or the clear induction admin program, or both, so that you have a really good sense of what we're specifically talking about. And this particular slide is really one that we operate in general with amongst all of our credential areas. When candidates contact us, we generally send them back to their institution. They really need to be talking with their programs and really need to get the information directly from their programs. You are the ones who know what they've completed, what they have not completed, what they still need to do. And so just know that when they contact us, our first thing is going to be, have you talked to your program, and sending them back. And so please keep that communication open with your candidates. We know it's a weird time of year. Some of your candidates would be technically done by now, but if you could keep that line of communication open and have a way for them to contact you over here. And obviously we're gonna continue to have the candidate office hours that are available for the performance assessment, so that those will stay in place. But just as a matter of principle, we do direct everybody back to their program. Next slide. All right, so jumping into what you all want to hear about. So as Terry mentioned, last Friday evening, the governor did sign an executive order that I think provides a lot of relief for some candidates. So we want to be clear today about when you recommend for which credential and how what considerations go into play. So the first thing on this, and obviously this is for preliminary programs, but you know, with induction programs, understanding this concept. So obviously many candidates hopefully have been able to finish all their requirements. So I'm hoping there is a group of candidates out there who have done everything so far. And you obviously can recommend at this point in time for the preliminary credential. So that takes care of a number of candidates. Now you're going to have other candidates, as we know, who have been able to do everything except the performance assessment. And the governor's executive order basically said that the statutory requirement for candidates to pass a performance assessment for an administrative services credential has been moved to the clear credential. So for those candidates who have done everything, they have completed everything programmatically and state requirements except for the APA, they will be able to get the preliminary credential, and there will be a renewal code that says that they still need to do the APA, and we'll talk more about that as we go through.
And Cheryl, can I add one little piece of information here? Mm-hmm. When we say preliminary credential, we mean if they have a job, the preliminary credential. Yes, yes. If they don't have a job, read CE, Certificate of Eligibility. So 1 and 2, if they've done everything but they don't have a job, they get a CE. 2, yes. They've done everything but the APA, they don't have a job, they get recommended for the CE.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, that piece was not touched by the executive order, so that stays in play the way it always has been. And then third, you're going to have some candidates who may have some additional programmatic things that they need to complete in addition to the APA that were required that they got interrupted because of the COVID situation. And for that, the PSVTW is still an available option. And so what you're needing to do is to have to kind of figure out what candidates come into play for the preliminary based on the executive order, and then the PSVTW. Okay, next one. And this chart is a very nice, clean, it makes it very clear that if the only thing they have left to do is the APA, then they should be able to get the preliminary with the APA renewal code or their certificate of eligibility, as Terry mentioned. And then if there are other program requirements, it would be the PSVTW. Okay, turning this over to Terry, who's going to talk more about the PSVTW.
So we really believe there's going to be a very small number of people for a PSVTW in the admin world. What are some of the other requirements that might not have been completed? Maybe you have someone who did not have the prerequisite teaching credential and they had a credential that did not require CBEST, so they still need to do CBEST, but they haven't done it because the testing centers were closed. This person would need to do a PSVTW. If there are additional program requirements that have yet to be completed, so maybe there's just a teensy bit of coursework, but you really think they're pretty much done with the program. Maybe they have an assignment to fulfill for an incomplete class. Or maybe they haven't demonstrated the CAPE sufficiently in their preliminary program and they need just a little more clinical practice type work. Then the person would be a PSVTW person. We really do think that most of the admin candidates probably have done almost everything except maybe a cycle or two of the APA. So we think most of them will get the preliminary with the APA code, but if we wanted to add in for you here, who might you think about for the PSVTW? And it's those. To be very specific about the EO, the executive order, which leads to the preliminary or the certificate of eligibility with the APA renewal code. It's actually for candidates enrolled in the 2019-20 year who were impacted. They were placed in a local education agency. They were impacted by COVID. They were in the process of the APA. They were unable to complete the APA solely due to school closures, and they've completed everything else. And that because the governor signed this executive order, the preliminary program must recommend that candidate for the preliminary with the APA renewal code. That requirement to complete the APA is now a clear credential requirement for the candidates completing in the spring and summer of 2020. Moving to the next slide. The administrator performance assessment has been postponed for those EO candidates, and it's been postponed by the PSVTW because they get an extra 1 year. So this is interesting. You have to help your candidates understand that if they are on a PSVTW, they have 1 year, whereas if they're on a preliminary credential, they have 5 years. But either way, they must complete the APA. And the APA needs to be completed with support. And the appropriate place for this support now is the commission-approved teacher induction program. So the candidates are already going to know what the APA is. They're going to have been taught about it by the preliminary program.
And Terry, if I can just...
Go ahead, Amy.
You said it would be offered by the teacher induction program. You meant
administrator. I meant administrator.
Yeah,
I thoroughly apologize. I meant administrator induction program. Okay, let's go to Gay and the transition plan.
So the transition plan is something fairly new for our preliminary programs. It's always been suggested, but now we have a real purpose and a reason to have it in effect for this year. So the transition plan is the remaining requirements that a candidate needs to finish in order to finish up the program completion. It's outlined on letterhead from the preliminary program and signed with an authoritative signature, perhaps a contact information for the receiving induction plan or program. So then that candidate is able to take that with them to where they are employed now. And that transition plan, number one, shows them exactly what needs to be done for this candidate at the induction program level. And then secondly, that is used when the coach has been assigned and the candidate and the coach are asked to do the individual induction plan that has a focus on those preliminary requirements until those are finished, and then they move on to induction, more induction-like focus. See, mine's stuck on the slide, so there you go. We have this catchy little document that is entitled Administrative Services Credentialing, ASC, Preparation Program Support for Leadership Candidates Employed on a Variable Term Waiver, PS-VTW. It sounds like a dissertation topic, so we lovingly called it here multiple supports. And it's much easier to remember that way, so we call it the support document internally. And this is a document that's helpful for all stakeholder groups because this truly is going to be a partnership effort for us to take these candidates to success. We're striving for a win-win for both programs and candidates and employers. So this is it's set in place to help everyone remember all the support that these candidates are going to need. The document has 5 different categories. So it lists the preliminary program's responsibilities. Our responsibility as commission staff to these candidates and to both the preliminary and clear program. The candidate's responsibility, mostly in relation to the communication and who do I ask which questions to. The employer responsibilities about shepherding that candidate to the correct program and getting them the help that they might need. And finally, the induction program responsibilities on how they're going to come alongside and support their efforts. And then finally, the slide, you'll see an alternate place to hit the same document. We provide the address at the bottom explicitly.
And Gay, could I add here, this document was actually posted in May when the PSVTW became initially available, but it's being updated now. And the document's going to actually have an even longer title because it's going to say not only for people serving on a PSVTW, but also people serving as an administrator on a preliminary credential with an APA renewal code. So there's kind of 2 groups of people that are going to need to finish an APA up in their induction program. Thank you, Gabe.
Sure. So moving on to the administrator induction program participants. So this is just for induction programs. We're reiterating, making sure you know there are 3 types of candidates who may be coming to serve in your program. So initially, the preliminary credentialed candidate who comes to you, it has everything completed, the APA is done, the program requirements are done. This is the traditional candidate you've had in past years. However, there's maybe someone coming to you who has a preliminary credential based upon the executive order. These are folks who have the program requirements done. They understand in their head what's supposed to be done with a Cal APA, but now they are asking support, thought partner to come alongside them to help them with the submission of the APA. So all program requirements are done, APA is not yet done. And then the third, which Terry said is going to be a very small number, we believe. These are folks who have completed only the majority of the program. They have some program requirements left to complete. They had to take an incomplete in a course. They have to do another piece of competency for the program, the requirement that didn't get done. And then they also have the APA. But we think this is going to be our smallest group possible. So then we want to move to talking about the support for our new administrators and listing just some of these that are already in place or have been processed out, so we need to follow. The new teacher, the new administrator will be that, having a new job to them, their first time to step out into an administrative role in education. So they're going to need those just-in-time supports or what we call water cooler conversations. We're hoping that the IIP will help them with their long-range professional learning opportunities and completing the APA, then moving on to professional practice opportunities. But don't forget they need the just-in-time coaching supports on the things that are happening day to day, minute to minute in their job. Secondly, we want them to know that we are there to help them reflect on their new job, as well as help them set goals for the future. Where do you want to grow according to the capsule? And how can we help you move in that direction as well? So to help them with these things, there will be informational webinars, not only for the new administrator, but those who support the administrator. Coaches, we'll be able to check into some webinars. Later on, Amy's going to share with you. If you've got some gung-ho folks who already want to know, we have webinars available that they can go into and look and see what the APA is all about already. We're going to have dedicated office hours just for candidates to call in to say, I'm struggling here, I don't remember what this piece, what does the CTC say about this? So they can directly reach out to the agency. We have worked with CUE in the past, and they are been very helpful with us as we move forward as well on teaching techniques. we're moving to a very unique position where there's going to be distance learning and there's going to be teaching online, as well as, I see it almost as a flipped classroom where folks are going to be working in, almost doing practice together and doing outside other conversations pieces. So those techniques, they're going to help their teachers move forward in as they supervise them. And then another support is we hope to equip our coaches to understand what the transition plan is so that they are equipped so that they can move over to the IIP conversation. And that says ILP, I know, it should say IIP. So the initial induction plan is set out for that candidate. And finally, help them understand how the IIP documents the new administrator's work.
Okay, so now we're going on to the application guidance. So when a candidate is ready to be recommended for the preliminary or the certificate of eligibility, it would be recommended just as if you normally would when a candidate's completed all the requirements of the program. These ones will have an additional renewal requirement of the APA added when you are submitting the online recommendation. And this goes for the preliminary or the certificate of eligibility. So if you're recommending for the certificate of eligibility and they have the added code of APA, when that candidate upgrades to the preliminary credential, that APA renewal code will be added to that preliminary. So it does not need to be completed with the certificate of eligibility, but it does need to be completed when they move on to the clear credential. Additional guidance for submitting an online recommendation, including how to add the APA renewal requirement to that online recommendation, can be found on the link on the slide or on the Commission's website under the COVID-19 information. The next slide, please. So which programs recommend? So for the preliminary program, if a candidate's completed all the requirements, including the APA, then they can be recommended for the certificate of eligibility if they do not have offer of employment as an admin, or the preliminary credential if they do have that offer of employment in an admin position. They can be recommended for the certificate of eligibility or the preliminary with the APA renewal code, or they can be recommended for the PSVTW. Now, the recommendation for the preliminary or the certificate of eligibility with the APA code will be completed online, but the PSVTW will be a paper application that will need to be submitted to the Commission. And then for those that already have the preliminary admin credential, once they complete their admin induction program, then they can be recommended to upgrade to that clear credential. So with that, we're going to go ahead and open up to our Q&A.
Okay, we have some questions. Some have already been answered, but I'd like to start at the top and work our way down. There's a question from the Reach Institute ILA program, and the question says, when will the revised multiple supports document you mentioned be available?
Very soon. We are just finalizing that. I would say by Monday it will be posted on the web page, on the COVID Actions webpage. Gay, Amy, does that seem reasonable? By Monday. Remember, this presentation will also be archived on the YouTube channel and available, as well as the slides from the presentation will be available, all on the COVID Actions webpage.
Okay. Susan Bellinardo asks, is the PSVTW, again standing for Program Sponsor Variable Term Waiver, only for candidates whose program was interrupted because of COVID-19? And an additional, for example, the fieldwork requirement was not completed. Would candidates who did not enroll in required courses be eligible?
That required courses gets questionable, because what we've said kind of as a rule of thumb this candidate is really done. They really just have this little bit left over. They're 95% done. But because COVID, they may not have finished all their clinical practice. That's a program requirement. That's not the APA. If that's the case for a candidate, then the PSVTW would be appropriate. Coursework is much more questionable. Like I said, if they have an incomplete they're finishing up, yes. Anything more than one course, no, they've not finished 95% of the program. Okay, Amy, anything to add there?
No, I would just, I completely agree with what you're saying. This executive order, as well as the PSVTW, were established for those candidates who were truly all the way through the program, except for work and practice that needed to be conducted in schools that were then closed. So this is an exception, an option for those candidates that really were in good standing, have come all the way through your program, and just really could not finish their performance assessment because they could not have access to educators in schools that were closed.
Okay, so moving on to our next question from Malika Bryant. Is there the possibility that an individual could complete the required elements while possessing a certificate of eligibility while not yet in an admin position? Or will they need to address these elements when they are in a position and enrolled in an induction program?
I could go first on this, Terry, and you could
Yep,
clarify.
I think that's
So
perfect.
let's all remember the administrative performance assessment is embedded in a program, and we have a page and a half describing supports that a candidate should receive. And our standards also speak to supports that candidates should receive while engaging with the performance assessment. Candidates should not be able to sort of go rogue and complete this on their own. They need support, and faculty should still continue to review their work, watch their videos, and offer those challenging questions to help them increase their performance. So that being said, if they want to finish, they should stay with the preliminary program and finish, because the preliminary program is the one who is overseeing that work in a school setting. If they don't want to finish, they could go off and hold this certificate of eligibility until such time they get a job. Let's say it's in 5 years. And then once they are in that position and have the preliminary credential and are enrolled in induction, then they could take and finish the APA. The one caveat we want to offer all of you is to carefully think for each individual candidate, what is the right path forward for them? We do need to remember that cycles that are completed and passed are only good for 10 years. So if they are really not expecting to come back for quite some time, or not expecting really to move into an admin position for whatever set of reasons, you do want to advise them, if they ever think they really ought to get this work done now. This brings up one other point that we may get asked about, but I'll go ahead and address it, and that is that the passing standards set right now are for the administration currently in the 2019-2020 year for the Cal APA. They are being continued into the next administration year, which is 2020-21. And we are doing a standard setting study next spring. The passing standards could increase. I would expect they would over time increase, given that they are 14, 12, and 12 now. So whenever the candidate in the future does engage in the Cal APA, they would have to meet the new passing standards set at that time by the commission. It is the commission who sets those passing standards and determines when those passing standards go into play. So just please keep those two things in mind. A cycle is good for 10 years, and standards in the future could be readdressed and redetermined by the commission. So Terry, anything else you want to add there?
I think you've really explained it well. This connects to another question of, if they don't have a position, they don't necessarily need to get the CE at this point in time. They could just continue with you and finish their performance assessment and be recommended for the preliminary sometime early this fall if they can get the performance assessment in. It's just They can be recommended for the CE if they want to put a lock on this. So it puts a lock on their program, but it does not lock the passing standard in currently. Whichever year they do the APA in, they will need to meet the passing standard from that year's passing standard.
Correct. So again, I just want to urge you, it really is a candidate by candidate discussion, because you want to think about with your candidate, are you about to get a job? Do you plan to get a job? Are you really moving into an admin position? And then take steps to help them figure out the best path for being able to finish that performance assessment with support at a school site under your guidance as a preliminary program or under an induction program guidance because they're employed. Remember, there are issues of liability. You can't be working in a school on something, on a credential, if it isn't part of a program's MOU, part of a understanding between the candidate, the program, be it preliminary or induction, and the employer. So all of that needs to be navigated. And we know that the certificate of eligibility is kind of that placeholder. We know it's good for the candidate's entire professional career. It's just that when they do engage in that job, then they could have the renewal code and they would have to complete. If they can complete now and get either that that certificate without the renewal code, or they can get the preliminary because they have the job without the renewal code, that may be a good idea. Again, it will be a candidate by candidate and program decision together.
Thank you, Amy. The next question, I think you just answered, is from Dina Pasis. For administrators who earn the preliminary with the APA renewal code, what benchmark scores will they be accountable for in the event when they're ready to go into their induction program? And you said, I believe you said whatever scores are in effect at that time, basically, yes?
Yeah, that is correct. So it is called a passing standard score, and that passing standard score is established by the commission. Currently, the established passing standards are 14 for cycle 1, 12 for cycle 2, and 12 for cycle 3. A standard setting study will be conducted next spring when we have a new data set, and the commission will be asked to reconsider their determination of the passing standard, and at that time we could see a change. And certainly going forward into time, as programs and candidates sort of increase their capacity to engage in these cycles and we see an increase in passing standard scores by candidates, we could probably expect passing standard scores to increase over time. So yes, whatever year you're in is this passing standard you will have to meet.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy.
Before we move on, Kara, I wanted just a clarification of terminology use. Dina uses the word benchmark in there, and just remembering that there is a benchmark requirement in our CLEAR standards that ask for you to tell the candidate how they're coming along in their progress check. So it's a progress check. So here Dina is talking about Cal APA scores, not the benchmark in the CLEAR program.
Thank you for clarifying, Gay. The REACH Institute is asking, if candidates get the certificate of eligibility with Cal APA renewal codes and are affiliated with us next year, and they submit the Cal APA, will they then get a regular certificate of eligibility once they have passed all 3 Cal APA cycles? In other words, will the Cal APA renewal codes be removed once they have passed the requirement?
Brittany?
Yeah, so once they're issued this certificate of eligibility with the APA renewal code, and they pass that before they upgrade to the preliminary, once that candidate applies with the app-in fee, half fee, to upgrade to the preliminary, that's when the codes will be removed. So if they want to remove the APA code prior to upgrading to the preliminary, it'll be an application of fee. So it most likely be in the candidate's benefit that once they have that offer of employment, to go ahead and remove the code when they upgrade to that preliminary.
And Brittany, we know that there are some people who do administrator prep programs and don't necessarily have a goal to become a school administrator anytime in the near future. So let's say we have someone who's finishing their program that way. They get a certificate of eligibility with the APA on it, so the APA has to be completed. They do complete the APA. The certificate of eligibility is good forever.
Correct.
But the APA score is only good for 10 years. So does it make that's a requirement in regulations for all examination scores for the commission. So if a candidate is still waiting and just keeping their certificate of eligibility, they would need to have the APA renewal code removed before 10 years elapses from the first of their passing cycles, because the cycle will expire after 10 years if it's not been applied to a credential.
Yeah, so in that case, if they, within the 10 years, if they're still not looking for an admin position, then it'd be an application of full fee then at that point to remove that APA code and to be issued that full certificate of eligibility without any renewal requirements.
So it really does sound there's a real benefit possibly for not getting the certificate of eligibility if the person doesn't have an admin position yet. Maybe just trying to finish up with the preliminary program and being eligible for the full CE without the APA code.
Yeah.
If they're looking at not getting in an admin position within that 10 years, it will most likely be to the benefit of the candidate to wait. But it's completely up to the candidate and the program at that point.
Right. And I would just jump in again and say, let's remember where we are in the development of the Cal APA. Our passing standards currently are set to support program development and candidates. Now is the time, if you're involved, to complete your Cal APA, because moving forward, this is going to be so much easier for you as a candidate if you ever then engage in becoming an administrator. Then you're not faced with perhaps redoing your Cal APA, you're not faced with higher standards, etc. So again, we urge you to counsel your candidates. If they have one cycle to finish, really, is there a way for you to support them in doing that before they move forward, leave your program, have things they're facing? So anyway, just keep that in mind, that there could be a different Cal APA that has a different, not different, but different in that it has a different passing standard in the future. So if they're very close to finishing, we'd love to see if there is a way you could counsel them to help them finish that before they apply. That way they can get their certificate of eligibility without the renewal code, or if they have a job, they could get their preliminary without that renewal code. But of course, every candidate's different, so good counseling will help here.
You all must be looking at the Q&A because Melody Thornson asks, why wouldn't a program just wait to apply for the certificate of eligibility until a candidate turns in their remaining APA if they are aiming to have it submitted prior to December 31st, 2020?
Mm-hmm. That is what we encourage if possible. That won't be possible for every candidate, but for those that it's possible, that we would encourage you to move in that direction.
Excellent. I'll ask one more, then I'll pass it back to my friend James. Nair De Silva asks, when candidates are recommended for a certificate of eligibility with the APA renewal code, how long do they have to pass the APA? I understand they just have 5 years when they activate their admin preliminary.
I can try and answer, but Brittany, you may want to jump in as well. As far as I understand, the certificate of eligibility is good for your life. So theoretically, you can hold that certificate of eligibility and do it at any point in time in the future that you can.
Yep, that's correct. The certificate of eligibility has no expiration date. So at that point, if they're issued the certificate of eligibility with that APA requirement, it's up to the candidate on when they choose to finish it.
Okay, our next question comes from Yesenia Rivas Suarez, and the question asks, can candidates in the non-consequential year who were not able to complete APA this spring be recommended for their preliminary with an admin position? And if so, is submission then a clear credential requirement?
Yes, Yesenia, whether a candidate is non-consequential or consequential doesn't really come into play around the executive order. For non-consequential candidates, their responsibility is to complete and submit the Cal APA by December 31st of 2020. Remember, if they miss that mark, they roll over and become a paying candidate who has to meet the passing standards. So if they're non-consequential and they complete, they can have all the options we've talked about this morning. If they are a candidate that is consequential, they have all the options we were talking about this morning. So you do not need to think of your non-consequential candidates differently in this case.
Okay, and our next question from D.A. Silva, when a candidate with an APA condition code is ready to clear their admin preliminary, which program is responsible for signing off that the APA requirements have been fulfilled?
It depends on which program they're in. If they're still part of your preliminary program, because you have not applied for their certificate of eligibility, their preliminary, or a PSVTW, then it's your job. If the candidate moves on into induction because they have a job, then it's the job of induction.
Except, Amy, if the candidate is on a PSVTW, it's still the preliminary program's job.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah.
So once the person holds a preliminary, it becomes induction's responsibility. But if the person has no preliminary and is on a PSVTW, it is the preliminary program who will make the recommendation for the preliminary credential.
Okay, thank you. Amy, this is one that you and I can both answer. It's from Roberto Nunez. I love the information on the support for new administrators, specifically on the just-in-time supports. Can you speak to when you foresee the office hours, online teaching techniques, and informational webinars kicking off and times for each to occur?
Yes, we appreciate that question. As soon as we wrap up this webinar today, we're going to get right on to getting all those dates established and published for you in the PSD e-news. We do anticipate starting this work this summer and certainly through the fall, but we haven't exactly picked dates yet, but we will probably by next Friday's PSD e-news, you will see those dates established. At the end of this webinar, we're going to talk about supports that are available right now that you can get to through the PSD e-news. We did deep dive reviews of each of the 3 cycles back in January. They have been on your PSD e-news since January, and we will show those links to you again. So if you want to this afternoon spend time getting to know these cycles, you can. And we will start office hours probably, I would imagine, in August and moving on, but depends. I know that you all enroll candidates every month, so if we get a sense that we need to start sooner, we will. But dates are coming.
Perfect. Okay, I'll take one more, and then Kara, I will turn it over to you for the last 2 questions. This is from Hawk. If candidates get an admin job after receiving the certificate of eligibility, to whom should they report their job status? Is it to the program or the commission to earn their preliminary credential?
So once they've been offered that position of an admin, they would need to mail in a paper application form, the half fee of $50, and the form called the CL-777. Mail that into the commission. That way we can upgrade their certificate of eligibility to the preliminary credential.
Thanks, Brittany. So Cheryl Reynolds Young asks, so are we saying that if a candidate has completed our 16-month program, with the exception of the Cal APA, they can remain enrolled in our program until they complete or pass the APA with support?
It's up to the candidate and how your institution wants to think about this support. We've had conversations around the concept of a candidate must be affiliated formally with you. Some people call that enrolled, some people don't. We have all different types of programs. So Could they stay with you to finish? Yes, they could. Can you require them to? No, you can't. And Terry, you might want to elaborate, or Gay, on that question.
I'll take the first stab and then let Terry come back and finish it off. It is obviously easier for our programs who are independently owned and operated, for lack of a better term, that if they don't have a hierarchical structure that has to do approvals on course requirements and changes and all of those things, it's easier for them to have a 0 credit course or a non-fee course, or in the case of REACH, where Cheryl works, that perhaps they can remain affiliated through just an agreement, an MOU. But if you are with a CSU or a UC and have a hierarchical structure, that becomes more difficult. And we're working with programs and working with both of the systems to try and find out the best way to find a place to put these affiliations, to have them be remaining under the authority of a commission-approved program in order to validate their presence on a public or private California school. Terry, you have anything to add?
I think that's very accurate. The concern is if the candidate was only is not finished because of COVID, they were not planning to re-enroll next year. They're not planning to pay tuition. What is appropriate? And that's why the commission first took action to develop the PSVTW. And then the governor came with the executive order to say also, we don't want to hold these people up. If the person does not want to get a job and would like to continue to be affiliated with your preliminary program to complete their APA, that is of course fine. But the candidate does have the right, because of the governor's executive order, if only the APA remains, that candidate has the right to request to be recommended for the preliminary with the APA renewal code, and the preliminary program must honor that request.
Thank you all. Last question for now. Marisol Risak asks, slide 14 references teaching, and Gay shared the need to have the administrators understand distance learning. Is it required that one IIP focus on distance learning?
That's a great question. Thank you, Marisol. The content of the IIP is always linked back to the capsule for our administrators. I don't think we have a specific capsule that discusses electronic learning or distance learning, but you can certainly find the aspects of the distance learning and meeting the needs of candidates and engaging students throughout the capsules and the leadership piece. So again, they're leading staff in many responsibilities to equip them, but can we require that? Might be a program requirement, but it's not a state agency requirement from the CTC. Anything to add, anyone?
And those are all the open questions we have at this time.
All right, so if we have people who have had a question come up and you would like to raise your hand, we will be able to allow you to ask your question orally, and by raising your hand, I would click to allow you to speak, and then you would need to turn off the mute on your microphone.
Terry?
One more question.
Yes, thank you. We've
Oh,
got
good.
one
Go
more
ahead.
question in. It is from Reach Institute ILA. If we have candidates who opt to stay with us and we apply for the certificate of eligibility later, either in the fall or the spring, this will impact program completion rates. Will there be a way for this to be addressed, or will it impact accreditation review?
Oh, really good question. This year is a crazy year for completion rates. It will not impact your accreditation review. Staff has been absolutely running and started running even faster when the executive order came out. We are going to have a conversation, and we've actually asked people not to put numbers into the accreditation data system quite yet. We may be able to get an additional code option for completion that includes something like due to the executive order or is on a PSVTW. So you're identifying that this person is pretty much done with your program, but not completely done. We will have guidance out on the ADS entries next week. Right now, this week, it's agenda cutoff, and we've been prepping to try to get a couple of these webinars done. But no one is going to look at your program and say your completion rates are crazy this year, because they are crazy. That's not going to impact accreditation.
And it looks like we have another question from Rebecca Harris asking about, I believe it would be a follow-up to what you just stated, Terry, how the ADS will be affected with all these speed bumps from this year. They're further along than time has allowed to think and talk and plan everything. So I think you just answered the question.
I think I did. Rebecca, if not, please go ahead and raise your hand and ask it some more. We have been thinking about this. We were waiting for the executive order to drop because we did not want to add a PSVTW option and then a week later have to have our technology folks try to add another option. There's also the reality that we may not be able to add options because once you complete your program deck, the questions won't change. I'm just thinking about this right now. So yeah, your program decks are already completed. So we are going to have to think about this and we will get back to you. Any participants have a question that's come to mind that you want to raise your hand to ask? If not, we will move on to some of the next slides, and we can always do a few more questions at the end.
Okay, so we wanted to just point out that we do have some additional information ready for you right now. We invite you to take a look at the COVID-19 actions that are posted on the Commission's website. And of course, we have moved quickly this spring to finding the most efficient way to get you information. And as it turned out, the Commission had its own YouTube channel. And so we have been posting all of our webinars for you to revisit if you would like on the Commission's YouTube channel, and you see the link there. Next slide, I believe. We have one more slide. This is where you can see the shortcut route to getting to the Cal APA particular webinars. And we do have some TPA webinars there because some of you know that we've been offering a series of how to teach online videos with experts from CUE and from our faculty. Turns out we have a lot of expertise on how to teach online, and we just thought it would be helpful for the Commission to showcase some of that expertise and then provide it for you on this YouTube channel. So check that out. And then finally, on our own PSD e-news since January, we have been posting these links. And so for those of you who are eager to get started and have not yet had the opportunity to learn about and understand what we're measuring in these 3 APA cycles based on the CAPE, you may go right here and listen to a walkthrough of each cycle and the rubrics that are used to score those cycles. So these are already ready. We will be revising webinars and providing updated webinars as soon as we wrap up this week and get on to really thinking about supports for the next administrative year, which begins in July and wraps all the way around to next July. So we will be putting those dates out as well. Those will be live webinars so that you can actually interact with us and ask questions. These are asynchronous. You can watch them on your own. So with that, we can go to our next slide and see if we have looks like we have a few more questions that have come in.
Excellent. As James and Kara are reading the question, I'm going to put Gay on the spot here a little bit, and you can say yes or no. In the teaching world, as we're preparing for Monday's webinar, Karen Sacramento is looking at possibly scheduling some meeting times where induction program leaders who want to come together to brainstorm, talk about best practices with each other, and possibly even get feedback from a staff member who understands the APA, if that is a possibility. Is that something that you are considering in the admin induction world also?
Yes, we are, and we're looking at it from both the preliminary program aspect. We have an implementation conference that's coming up that we are addressing in breakout sessions, those kinds of issues. And then very open to how we are going to do that with our clear induction programs as well.
Looks like we have one more question.
Yes, sorry, I was attempting to unmute myself. This is from Tammy Miller. She says that she apologizes, but she believes this question was previously asked, but the meeting cut out. It was when it was responded, so if we could just repeat. If a candidate applies for a certificate of eligibility and has the APA as a renewal requirement, if they transfer to a preliminary within 5 years, will the preliminary now have the APA renewal requirement listed, or will the candidate need to complete the APA before they can get their preliminary?
No, if their certificate of eligibility has the APA renewal code listed and they have not satisfied it when they upgrade to the preliminary, then that APA will transfer to the preliminary. Then they'll have that 5 years on that prelim to complete the APA. Now, if the APA is completed when they hold the certificate of eligibility and we see that, then the preliminary will not have that APA code.
Some of you might be wondering, how in the world will the commission know whether a candidate's passed the Cal APA when they apply? And we do have in place a check on APA passing. So the data that comes to you as programs, the data also comes to the commission, and that data will be able to be checked in the as we move forward here, so that we know that a candidate has in fact passed the APA. So Terry, any last words?
I was going to say, we're still temporizing to give people a chance to think if they have another question.
This
is not necessarily the last of these webinars. There will be more. The performance assessment team has things happening on a weekly basis with office hours, with coordinator updates, and moving forward into the induction world to support induction programs. If other options come up, we will bring them up. This executive order really applies to people who are on target to finish their program in spring, summer of 2020. We have to look for another executive order, most likely, for further into the future. We completely understand that there are candidates who will be completing in December, January, March, May of 21 that are very likely going to be impacted by COVID. When the governor signs executive orders, they are normally for 30, 60, 90 days. This executive order has an August 31st date in it, and it does imply that people who are finishing their program this spring and this summer due to COVID impacts this spring. As we get firmer information on exact dates, we will get that information to you. But it is very possible the commission will be requesting another executive order, or just more easily an extension of this executive order to December 31st, to March 31st, to June 31st, 2020. So that's hard to hear now, but it's the governor's policy is that the executive order is a limited thing at this point. Kara, your hand is up.
It is, because I wanted to let everyone know we have another question. And
Perfect.
It was a follow-up to the last conversation that we were just having, the last question. And the question is, so do you generate that change on your own, or do we need to apply for that change?
For the whole group, could we summarize what that change means?
Indeed. So let me go back.
I think she means for the the change from the eligibility to
Unmute her, she can speak for herself.
Oh, excellent. If you would raise your hand, Lori, it would be easier for me to find you. Perfect. You've raised your hand. I've clicked allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, it was just when you were referring to, I think it was Brittany
Yes.
talking about, or actually, no, it was Amy. When you're talking about getting the results, you guys are going to track that data for the results for the APA, their scores, so you'll know whether they've passed or not, and then you will know whether to take that off of, no. So we applied for that. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And maybe Brittany, you can talk about that, because sometimes it's the candidate and the employer, and sometimes it's the program, right? So maybe
it really depends. Yeah, it really depends on the candidate. Once they're issued that certificate of eligibility, they can apply directly to upgrade to that preliminary credential. Some people go through the program, some go through their employer. It's really going to be up to the candidate's determination if they're going to submit the application to upgrade to the preliminary on their own. Because once they hold that certificate of eligibility, it's going to be a paper application mailed to the commission to upgrade to the preliminary. It will not be an online recommendation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And then just to clarify, that is when, if the candidate on their own fills out that paper application and uploads it, that we would do a check. If they say they've passed, then we'll check and make sure that's true.
But for the induction program, they need to have evidence that the candidate has passed to submit the clear credential recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, our induction programs do not have the ability to use the results analyzer ed reports process. So do candidates get a record of their passing score, or can candidates open up their own link into the evaluation system for the induction leader to see that the person has passed?
Yeah, Terry, that's a great question. We are currently working with evaluation systems on this. We talked with them again about it this morning prior to this call. And we have different options. We're still exploring what we can do. We want it to be efficient and easy. So currently the data goes to the preliminary program that the candidate has told us they are part of. It goes to the candidate and it comes to the commission. In the future, pretty quickly, as soon as possible here, we're going to try and have the candidate have multiple options they can pick. So they could tell us, send my data to my preliminary program, of course, send my data to me and the commission, and send my data to my induction program. If we can figure that out, I'm sure we can figure it out. It's just when and how quickly. We will do it as soon as possible. We would like all of you to be able to see that data. In the meantime, the candidate has the data, and the data should be on the transition plan in some way. That transition plan should say this candidate has passed 2 cycles but has not yet passed the 3rd cycle. That transition plan goes to the induction program. So that's one avenue that's already in place. And then, of course, the candidate can share their assessment. It's called the assessment records report, I think, and they can share that. They have access to that data forever. That record puts all their assessment data there for them, and they can always have access to it. But as I said, we're going to try and update this as quickly as possible so that the candidate can also identify the induction program, so that the induction directors would have access to the results analyzer and ed reports and be able to see that data for any candidates that they are supporting in their programs. So stay tuned. We'll get you that information as soon as we can.
So at minimum, an induction program, when it looks at the transition document, the transition document will say candidate has completed leadership cycle 1, candidate has completed leadership cycle 2, candidate still needs to complete leadership cycle 3. And so therefore, if the candidate can show evidence of completing instructional cycle 3, leadership cycle 3, I apologize, then the induction program would know they've met that requirement.
Right. And we're always here. So you have any questions about this, you'll always be able to reach us. We have office hours every week. And as Gay pointed out, we're going to be adding additional office hours. We have office hours for preliminary programs right now. We're going to add office hours specifically for induction program support educators. And then, of course, we're going to try and just help our candidates by offering them an hour to talk to us directly about questions. So lots of support coming your way.
That's all the content we had planned to share with you today. Still asking one more time, working on my wait time. Does anyone else have a question? Do you want to raise your hand and I can call on you? If not, it is Friday. Please have a great weekend. Stay healthy, stay safe. And we will be in the little screens again sometime in the future. Thank you, everyone.